Good morning. It's nice to see you. I'm actually on the Mosaic committee, but I lead high school Sunday school every week. So I'm not delinquent. I really am, but I could not miss this week because my good friends are presenting, and these were not good friends until a few months ago. I'll share that, I don't know, maybe a year ago, I started having an email exchange and then a couple of Zoom calls with Chad and Dara Vandenbosch, who are missionaries in Mozambique. And they had gotten wind through the RCA that I was toying with taking a trip to Africa, which I did indeed do to Kenya this last summer. But in the midst of those conversations, I learned that Dara had recently finished a master's or was finishing a master's in art therapy. Dara is a nurse and had this interest in that. And we started talking together about doing some art in Mozambique, and you'll hear a little bit about that. So this last spring break, I took my daughter Harper and we went to Mozambique together and got to walk alongside them in their ministry and got to join Dara out literally in the bush as she brings her nursing all around hard to reach places. And we painted watercolors with her patients out in the bush. And then the rest of the week we spent working with different groups and creating a series of murals as a teaching tool for Chad's work, which is helping, part of what his work is helping farmers in that area transition from corn to agroforestry, which I assume we're going to hear about, because I could go on about it because I am now an agroforestry evangelist after being there. So I'm really excited for you to hear about their ministry there, but also to hear about what their lives are as missionaries, both there and the interesting twists and turns it's taken, and perhaps why they are in the United States right now. So there's a lot to learn from them. I told them that this is a group that likes to ask questions, so they should build in some space for that because you will have some questions at the end of this, I'm sure. So Chad and Dara Vandenbosch.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here this morning, and we do love to be able to answer questions. So please, we'll keep this very informal. And I think the best way, we wanted to talk about home, as Joel said. We know this is something that church is talking about right now, what home looks like and what home looks like for us. And I think the best way to do that is actually to share our story of how the Lord has brought us to where we are today, because we did not leave here in America, go, we're going to make our home in Mozambique. It's been a very curvy story for us to get to where we are today, but it's what makes home what it is for us. And so before we get started, I never like to presume that everyone knows where the country of Mozambique is, because I certainly did not when they asked me to go there in 2005. I had no idea where it was. So it's the red country there in Africa. It doesn't show up too well on there. You can kind of see where it is. And then where our home is actually in the central part of the country. You can see a little red dot there by Chimoio. Next to it is a little place called Gondola. That is where we call home now. And I just want to throw this in there too, just to give you a little landscape of what the ministry outlook looks like in Mozambique. This is from a website called Joshua Project. And all these little dots on here are people groups in Mozambique. There's about 50 some people groups in Mozambique. And the color will define whether it is considered reached, less reached, or unreached. So red, unreached, orange, less reached, green would be considered reached. So you can see the spectrum across the south, majority Christian. Central part where we are is less reached. It's considered mostly animist. So people really highly connected with the spiritual world and with the witch doctors and all of that. That is really prevalent in our area. And then the north is majority Muslim. And that's where there's still a lot of work to do in the country. Well, there's a lot of work to do all over the country, but specifically there. So I want to start out by telling there's our family. In our home, that's our yard there in Mozambique. But I want to start out by telling a story that I like to tell. I'm a bit of a storyteller too. And I went to Mozambique in 2005 to set up a recording studio to record and distribute God's word in audio form. So this here is an audio Bible that we're distributing now. And since 2005, we have distributed over 30,000 of these audio Bibles in, I think, 13 or 14 different languages in the country of Mozambique. And we've recorded, I think, 11 New Testaments, and we're working on our third Old Testament recording since 2005. So that's been a majority of what my work was there and what brought me there. And we've had some very interesting things happen through that ministry, because one of the fun things that we get to do is we actually get to distribute these audio Bibles to the people that need to hear. So there's a lot of people that cannot read, have not had access to education. And so what it looks like for us is we load up a bunch of these audio Bibles in the back of the car and take along a group of pastors, and we head out to a location where we're going to do an audio Bible distribution. Now, Mozambique is a country that does not have a lot of infrastructure. Only one road going north and south, 3 roads going east and west. And roads can be an exaggeration. So when we set up one of these audio Bible distributions, we connect with the pastors in a certain area. We say, we're going to come. We have this many audio Bibles. And they'll say, okay, meet us at our church in this place. And then you plug that into Google Maps and it goes, where in the world is that? There's no way you're going to get there using what we are used to using here. So we've come up with a system where we'll make sure that a church leader meets us at a main road. We'll meet up with them, and then we go the rest of the distance to the church. Otherwise, you end up who knows where. So in this particular circumstance, this is distribution in the middle part of the country to a really remote area. We had already been on the road for 3 days trying to get to that region. And then we meet this pastor along the road. Everything's good at this point. Now, I've learned a few things in the few years that we've done this now. You always need to ask a couple questions when you're venturing out on one of these little side excursions. And number one is, do vehicles get there? Seems like a silly question to ask, but oftentimes in an area where people are not used to traveling on anything bigger than a bicycle, motorcycle, or on foot, roads can be vastly overestimated. Like the capacity of a path can be very much overestimated. And so I asked this pastor, okay, Daniel, do cars go down here? He said, definitely cars go down here. Great. Okay, second question. How close is it? Now, this is another kind of silly question to ask, but we've learned over the years that to ask like a specific distance, miles, kilometers, whatever, oftentimes, again, people that aren't used to traveling with an odometer don't consider specific, distances. And so you can ask, how many miles is it? And you could get in a completely off the wall answer, just because people don't want to let you down and not give you an answer, even though they don't have a clue how far it actually is. And so you can go by time, but again, it's vastly different if you're walking or if you're in a vehicle. So we've gotten to the system where you ask, how close is it? And then the response gives you an idea of how close it actually is. So in this circumstance, I asked, are we close? And he said, un poco perto, which means a little bit close, which means it's a lot far. That's what I've learned. All right. So we knew we were going a distance. So you tighten the seatbelt and you get on the road. And so we started out on this, it's just a dirt single lane road going off into this really unpopulated area, I would say. So we were on the road. It wasn't terrible. I've been a lot worse. About an hour. So far, no problem. And then he goes, oh, here's the road going this way. And then there's a 2-track going that direction. So again, over my shoulder and go, okay, Daniel, cars do go down here, right? And say, oh, yes, cars go down here. Are we close? Estamos perto. He said, we're close, which means we still have a ways to go. So we continue on for another half an hour. And then he indicates, okay, here's the next road this way. And at this point I stopped because this was not a road. This was maybe a footpath. I stopped again and I turned around and I go, Daniel, do cars really come down here? He's like, oh yes, cars go down here. No problem. We'll make it there. I am really starting to doubt this at this point. And so again, I asked, are we close? He goes, yeah, perto, perto means close, which means we're kind of getting there now. I'm like, all right, well, what are we going to do? We might as well keep going. We've come all this way. We'll see what this is. But I'll have to admit, I was pretty grumpy at this point because we're driving along this path and it's a single path. So now you have to decide, do I want one wheel on the path and one wheel way off the path? Or do I straddle the path and have no wheels on the path? Because what I'm imagining is going to happen is we're going to hit a stump. And at worst, we're going to pop a tire. Or at best, we're going to pop a tire. At worst, we're going to tear the oil pan off and we'll never leave this area again in our lives. That's kind of where I'm going in my mind. But almost even worse than that is that I'm thinking, since we left the main road an hour and a half ago, we have not seen more than a dozen people and a handful of huts. Who are we distributing 200 audio Bibles to? Because this represents 200 families. We say average of 5 people listening to an audio. That's 1,000 people. We hadn't seen a dozen. And we've gone all this way, all this effort, risking the vehicle to distribute 2 audio Bibles. This doesn't seem right. And so I'm a bit grumpy at this point, thinking we've been a bit hoodwinked coming out here. But after another 10, 15 minutes of slaloming in and out of trees and through grass that's over the height of the hood of the car, all of a sudden we burst out into this clearing and there's a thatched roof church and dozens of people come running from all directions into this clearing, singing and dancing and celebrating. Not because we made it. I was celebrating because we made it at that point, but they were celebrating because something that they had only heard of and never experienced had arrived in their village. And that was God's word in a form that they could use. This. And over 3 days, we distributed all 200 of those audio Bibles. People came from I don't know where to that location because they heard that God's word had come in a language they could understand. And it was an amazing experience. Now, I tell that story because I see so many parallels between this story and the story of how we've gotten to where we are today in Mozambique. Because there were times on that trip where that road did not seem right, where it seemed like we were going in the wrong direction, where it seemed like we were never going to get there. And it was scary. But yet, God is faithful. And that's the story of our time together, because we both left America, headed for Mozambique individually. I'm from here. I'm from the metropolis of Overijssel. Dara is from northern Minnesota. Not any more populated than Overijssel, if you can believe that. And we actually met in Mozambique. And God had a plan there. And that is where home started. So when we met, Dara had already started adopting our oldest daughter, Nettie, who is 19 now. And when we met and got married, we thought, okay, we're going to finish up this adoption. We are going to head back to America. We are going to decide what the Lord wants us to do in ministry together. Because neither of us went to Mozambique thinking this is our life's calling. She went on a 1-year commitment to do this adoption. I went on a 2-year commitment to build a recording studio. That was 15 years ago. We're still there, but God had other plans. So during that time where we went back to Mozambique, the adoption just wouldn't finish. It went on and on. 4 years it took for that adoption to finish. And during that time, we had to throw out all these ideas of what we thought our future looked like, because it came to a point where the judge sat us down and said, this isn't going to happen. This adoption's not going to happen. And that was crushing for us. What are we going to do? She's in our care. Like this, how can this not be finished? And we had to say, are we willing to say, we're going to stay here in Mozambique until she's 18, even if the adoption isn't done? Are we willing to do that? We had to say, yeah, we are. It's our daughter. We can't not do that. In some way, saying that, it actually brought freedom, because then it was, okay, well, obviously, God, you want us here for some reason that we did not understand. What is that? And that's where Dara's project was born. Oh, sorry. This was actually a guy at that distribution out in the middle of the bush, one of the guys that received an audio Bible.
Yes. Is that on? Yeah. So as you've heard, I was a single mom in Mozambique for a couple of years, 3 years. And at that stage, I was just trying to survive as a single mom in Mozambique. And I thought, this is so silly. What am I doing here, Lord? Like, if I'm going to be a single mom, I need to be in America where I can have support and I can do more than just drive Nettie to school and back. And so it wasn't until I got married and had Chad there to support me and help not just be a single mom any longer. I was volunteering at a nutrition clinic a couple days a week. And in that, with that experience, I saw a lot of pain and suffering. And there was one little girl in particular that I would come home and talk to Chad about. No, she didn't come this week. I'm really afraid she's declining. And I was really concerned for her. And it was at that time when Chad was able to speak into me, because I'm not much of a visionary. I'm a great person to come alongside and help out and, do what I can. But I'm not great at being that visionary. But Chad, knowing my heart and knowing my nursing experience in America, had primarily been in hospice care. And so when I told him about this little girl, and I knew, I was like, if she could just have a little bit of Lasix, she'd be more comfortable. If she could just have this, she would have a better quality of life. And finally, Chad said, you have something that you can offer this country. There's a great need. Why don't you start a palliative care hospice program? And I was a little bit like, oh, I don't do that. I don't start programs. I can't do that. But I knew it was true. I knew that there were simple things that I could do to help children, help adults to just have a little bit better quality of life and be more comfortable as they go through very difficult disease processes and end of life situations. So that's a whole nother, we could talk about that for ages. But I did. So 10 years ago, I started this palliative care program. This year, we've celebrated having served 200 patients. Some of them got better and were discharged from our program. A lot of them have died with us. This woman on the right is one of our, I can't say favorite, should I? I shouldn't say favorite, but one of our most special patients. Her name was Rhoda Bobo. She's one of the few patients that our team actually approached and said, we think that we could maybe help you. You seem like your back probably hurts. This is as tall as she could stand. We actually chased her down on the dirt road one day. We saw her walking, and I'm not exaggerating that her hips often were higher than her shoulders as she walked down the road. And when we stopped to talk to her the first time, she was afraid. She thought that we wanted to hurt her or do something. So she ran as fast as she could to try to get away from us. And we had to convince her, like, no, we want to help you. We want to show you love. So long story short, she was on our program about 8 years, I think. And unfortunately, in February this year, she did pass away. But until the last about 12 months, this woman grew all her own food. In her condition like that, with a hoe, she would prepare the land around her house here, and she would grow all of her own corn to provide for herself because she never wanted to be a burden to her daughter. And she was just the most amazing woman to be able to get to know, to visit every week. My team sings and dances, and we just, more than the medicine that we can provide, we provide TLC, tender loving care, and we spend time with these people. We did art with Rhoda. It's just the time and creating that space where people know that they're valued, that they're seen, they're heard. So that's a lot of what my team does. And this photo is just to show a home in Mozambique. This is a very typical home in the area where we live. You can see the building in the front with the thatch roof. That's probably a kitchen, an area where they prepare their food. In the back would be a home with a bit of a tin roof, bunch of bricks on top to hold it down if it gets windy, which never seems like a good idea because then your children are sleeping inside there. And when it does blow off, those bricks are there. But many homes don't even have that on the left, you can see that might be a kitchen as well. But the home in the front here could very well be a house where someone sleeps in also. Very simple lifestyles. These are two of the 4 team members that I work with. That was the one in the back is just a visitor that was with us this day. But this past year was really, really hot in Mozambique, and we didn't have much rain. And for the first time in the 10 years, my little car could not keep up with the heat. And on the dirt road that we can't go very fast, my car was overheating just because it was 110 degrees. We weren't going very fast, and my car didn't like it. So this is us just one day waiting for it to cool down so we could continue on and make it home that day. And this is a patient that we had recently. Her name is Isabel. And she is one of the women who I saw the effects of what art can do and did for her. And it's probably about last year, right around this time, our supervisor from Global Mission, RCA, came to visit us. And he's a wonderful man who's worked in Africa all over the continent, a pastor and a pastor at heart. And when we visited Isabel, and I told him what I'd seen with Isabel when we did art together. As you can see, she has a horrific skin condition that was itchy. She was constantly itchy to the point that she would just cry and I was afraid she was going to go crazy because she was so itchy. When I actually was doing my master's research, she was one of the participants in my research, and she painted with the prompt that I gave for the research project. She painted for an hour and a half. And one of my colleagues that was with me, Rebecca, she's just 11th grade educated, rural Mozambican. And during that hour and a half of painting, Rebecca leaned over to me and said, "She hasn't itched for an hour and a half." And I thought, yeah, distraction is really important. That is something that's big for people like Isabel. So I left her with coloring sheets and markers. And my prayer and hope was that when she needed it, she could just take a few minutes, do something else, have a diversion from her miserable suffering that she was experiencing day by day. And with Derek, after Derek's visit, he said to me, he's like, "Well, Dara, what can we do to help Isabel do art every day?" And I thought, yes. Like this pastor who is very open-minded, but like he got it. He like saw the value of art and distraction. And there's loads of other benefits that the art can do and does do. And I believe your church understands that. And also I'd just like to share, we have a story here that I wrote about Isabel. It goes into much more detail. I mainly needed to write this for myself to process her story and how her story ended. So if you'd like one of these at the end, please feel free. It's a little bit raw. It's probably not refined as well as it could be, but this was just part of me processing a very difficult story. But if you'd like to read that, you're very welcome to take one. I don't remember what the next photo is. Oh, so with that in mind, the art that I have been able to do with my palliative care patients, I thought, well, there's more people that want to enjoy art. What if I started a community art afternoon? And this was a big part of what I was able to share with Joel and kind of got him excited about coming to Mozambique. So this is a group of women that meet outside our house about 2 Fridays a month. We just sit in the grass. I provide some sort of art materials and some sort of prompt. I'm not an art teacher. I'm not a professional artist like Joel is, but I just provide the space, provide the supplies, give them idea, give them the freedom to create, because we all were created to be creative. We were made in God's image and he's our creator, right? So, and these women, if you think about our lives in America, we all have opportunities to be creative. We get to choose how we dress in the morning. We decorate our houses. We cook. Those are all ways of being creative. Well, in Mozambique, you have very few clothes, so you wear what you have. You have a mud hut that doesn't really have walls. You're not going to go to Hobby Lobby to buy something to decorate with. You eat the food that you have. You don't really have options. So they have very limited. They're creative with their hair. That's a huge part of their culture. And they're creative with their singing and dancing. But the visual arts, they've never had an opportunity. So these women, you can just see, it gives them an hour and a half where they, most of them, don't bring their children. They just have an hour and a half to kind of be childlike and to enjoy being creative, having a new experience, playing with color. It's just, and it builds community. It's built a special bond between these women. It's given me new opportunities to connect with different people, to share love, to share space, to share time together. I don't know if Joel, and this is one of the groups that was part of painting in the murals. Don't know if there's anything that you want to add about that experience or those women that came together.
I never turned on a microphone. I would just say it was so beautiful to walk into that. And the day that I came, I feel like they dressed up. Like it was like this special thing, but also that this was regular for them. Like the things got laid out and they were right into it. And then the conversation began and but there was focus, and it was just so beautiful to see just the levity that instantly existed. And, you know, for an outsider coming in, Mozambique, what is it, the 6th poorest country in the world? I've been to the continent several times, but I've not experienced it in the way that I experienced it visiting the Vandenbosches. And so, you know, I was feeling that poverty. And then so instantly seeing this likeness, it was really beautiful.
And I'll just share, I have three rules for this group. I've tried from the beginning to say that, just clarify, set expectations, set some boundaries, because I wanted this time to be about art and about the community that builds. So my rules are, I'm not a nurse during this hour and a half. I don't want to hear about the health problems during this hour and a half. I'm not an ATM machine, which is common in Mozambique. Everyone needs money. Everyone will ask if they can have money. They know they cannot ask me during this time if they can have money. And the third rule is no gossiping. We are there to be together, to have a positive environment, to enjoy the creative process, and we're not to gossip. Of course, when they start talking in dialect, I have no idea what they're saying. So I try to reel them back in. But it's a space without expectations. I'm not expecting them to give me right answers. They're not having to paint a good, landscape. It's just a free space that gives them agency for that time. They are in control. They can enjoy that time. And there's not much of other space in their life where they have that freedom to not be thinking, I need to fetch water. I need to get firewood. I need to get my kid to the hospital. I don't know what I'm going to feed my children. Life is hard. And this is an hour and a half where they can just be and be free and be kids. So I guess maybe just any questions about the palliative care program, or we can keep moving on. That sounds good.
Okay. So 4 years that adoption took. And then finally, all of a sudden, one day, court called us and said it's done. No reason given. It was just like that. And we couldn't believe it. And so we were joyous. So we went back to the US to finish off the US side of things. And then we're like, well, God's called us to this now. We better go back. So we went back to Mozambique again, thinking, oh, we could probably adopt again. There's no way it could take longer than 4 years. And we were wrong. Second adoption was 6 years. It took 6 years to get that done. And during that time was probably the most difficult time that we've had as a family and ministry, because we were trapped. She was in our care, but the adoption wasn't going through, and we didn't have documentation to even be able to leave our province, which is small. And so for 6 years, we were stuck. And it was for us for we that pride ourselves on freedom, that's very difficult to not have that freedom. And again, we were asking ourselves, God, there has to be more to this than what we're understanding. You've got to be doing something here. Reveal it to us. And during that time, there was something very interesting happening. So we had distributed these audio Bibles kind of all over the country. But for some reason, right in our local area, we weren't seeing the fruit that we were seeing in many other areas of the country, where people were being really encouraged. We were seeing a lot of people listening to it for hours and hours and hours, and churches growing, churches deepening because of access to God's word. We weren't seeing that in our area. And it was through Dara's project, we kind of realized, look, there are so many unmet physical needs that to have the headspace to even consider something like this when you don't know what you're going to feed your family that night, or where you're going to sleep, or what you're going to put on in the morning, it's just not happening. And so, again, had to take a step back and go, well, I'm not smart enough to be a doctor. I can't really help in that, but I grew up on a produce farm in Overijssel. So maybe there's something there. Maybe God is asking us to do something in agriculture, which, going back again years, I remember talking with some people and going, boy, if there was one type of missions that I really wouldn't want to do, it's agricultural missions. Because not only do you have all the typical problems cross-culturally, working in places different, but then you're against the weather and all this stuff. And I mean, all the things that farmers like to complain about. But God certainly has a sense of humor. So in 2018, we started a farm called New Harvest Farm. And it's taken a long time for it to really come into its own, because we had so much to learn. I didn't know what I didn't know. And things that work here, not necessarily working over there. But God has been really gracious in that. So again, if this is what your cornfield looks like on the left, of course, you're going to be worried about what you're going to feed your family. And that's what many of the cornfields in our area look like. And corn would be considered a staple crop. When we moved onto the farm, we got that piece of land because it was abandoned. Nobody wanted it, because this was what it looked like on the right. That was a handful of our soil. And this was the corn that I found when we got there. Again, not much value there. But God has led us down a really interesting path of learning. And as Joel mentioned, we are doing something now called agroforestry, which I could talk about for a long time, but I'm not going to. Basically, we're integrating trees into agriculture. And what that allows us to do is actually to grow in a more natural way. And if you look at, we're stepping back into creation. We're looking back in Genesis. How did God make this earth to work? And we're talking about working in ecosystems and not fields. We're building vibrant ecosystems. This area used to be old growth forest until about 40 years ago. It was all logged off. And what happened was our intense monsoon rains caused huge amounts of erosion, which bring all this topsoil. We have no topsoil left on most of our fields. And because of that, production in the fields is just so low. So what we need to do is we need to restore the ecosystem. And trees is a huge part of that. What they do is they hold all the soil in place. They allow the microbiology to actually flourish and allow us to grow other crops along with the trees that are feeding people. So there's a lot that I could say about this, but I'm going to keep it brief. This was a field that I actually had an agronomist come and look at, and he took a handful of the soil and he said, good luck. He said, I have never seen such dead soil. There is nothing in here. He said, you are going to have to do something completely drastic, and it's going to take years for this to turn around. This was us planting out an agroforestry area. You can see we're planting trees in those holes. We have other crops going in between our tree rows. We have pineapple. We have certain types of grass that we use for fodder. We put vegetables in here. We're putting all kinds of stuff in here. 6 months in a field that we couldn't even get weeds to grow. We're having this. And the amazing thing is, if you look in these rows, we have cover crops in between the rows, but in those rows, we have over 30 different species of plants. And every one of those is good for food, for fodder, or for fuel. So we're actually taking the way that God created nature to work and using it in an agricultural system. And it's completely different from what I grew up doing and what everyone around there has done, but people are taking note. And there's a huge amount of interest in this because on a drought year, this was drought year, no irrigation. And it's just flourishing, where people growing corn, it was looking like that first slide. So people are taking note and going, wow, there's something to this. And I thought it was a gimmick when we started. Like, there's no way this is going to work here. And it does. It does. And using no inputs, put a little bit of manure in. That's it. Nothing off farm. So people that don't have access to credit, who don't have access to money to put in fertilizers and things like that, you can still grow. So, and it's good for nature. We're actually restoring ecosystems, holding all that soil in place, creating a place for everything to flourish, including us as humans, which are part of the ecosystem. So that all came out in this, well, we were stuck for 6 years. And then 5 years into this 6 years of being stuck, and all this is bringing together people. This is one group of people that wanted to come and learn. We have people coming all the time wanting to learn. We're going out and setting up these areas where people can learn about something they've never seen, but we point it all back to God. We call it Growing with God. It's our training program. And it's really fun. So 5 years into the 6 years of being stuck, Dara was out doing a visit, and she sent me a picture of her holding a little baby, and with a message that just said, pray for this child. And me, being the good missionary that I am, wrote back directly and said, put the baby down and walk away. But there was immediately a check in my spirit because she had never done this before. She had never sent anything. We've been, married for almost 10 years. She'd never done that before. That was not her MO. And immediately I'm like, there's got to be more to this story. And so I'm like, okay, tell me a bit more about this. But yeah, so there was this baby, and she was severely malnourished. She was 5 pounds at 7 months. Mother had recently passed away. And we are like, God, you have got to be kidding me. We have been stuck in this country for 5 years. We are at wit's end. We are emotionally and physically spent. Really? This is a good idea? This is what you want? And we just kept hearing, trust me. Like, we've never had a baby in the house before. This one is sick. What will happen if she dies? What's that going to do for our family? Trust me. Like, trust you. We've been trusting you to finish this adoption for 6 years, and it's not done. How do we trust you? Just kept hearing, trust me. Well, 2 weeks later, she was in our house. 2 months after that, the adoption was mysteriously done again. Less than a year later, we had all 3 adoptions complete, and we were a family of 5. And only God could have done that. And that is what home means for us. This is our house in Mozambique. You can see, pretty rural out there, but it's just a house. This is home. We never expected this to be home. We never expected Mozambique to be home. We never expected to be a family of 5. There were so many things that we had never anticipated. And yet God had a better plan than what we could have imagined. And we like to say is it has not been easy at all. There have been so many challenges, but it has been rich. And it's that richness that we found in our home. And I think we've struggled. I mean, coming from West Michigan, coming from Minnesota, living in Mozambique, adopting children from Mozambique, what does home really look like? I mean, when we come back here, does this feel like home? No, less and less every time. But what does feel like home is when we're together as a family. And that's what we see in our girls, because I mean, it is a world away from Mozambique to here. As Joel can testify, it feels like we're on a different planet. And yet our girls transition so seamlessly because it's our home. Wherever we are as a family is our home. And it's these things that make it rich, because it's all about the traditions, right? It's all about these traditions that we come up with that make things home. We thought that we couldn't do Thanksgiving in Mozambique because you can't find a turkey, and you can't find cranberries, and you can't find a nice orange pumpkin, and you can't find all these things. And yet we figured out a way to do it. You have to buy the pumpkin about 6 months ahead of time and freeze it. You have to buy dried cranberries. You can only get turkey legs, but they work. I mean, just all these things. Then we make these our own traditions. And now this Thanksgiving, I'm going to miss it. We're going to be here and we're going to have the big turkey and we're going to have the stovetop stuffing and the gravy. And I'm going to miss the way we kind of hack that together. And that's home. So, oh, yes. So we had this, we were told he was a semi-famous regional artist. Came to Mozambique, you may know him. He painted these. So these are actually murals. These are very small versions of the real things. The real things are about 5 foot by 3 foot, right? So each panel. And so what this does is it tells a story that we are trying, that we believe God is asking us to fulfill in our area. And this is through the lens of agriculture. This is kind of where we're at today. You see poorly productive fields. We've got the burning in the background. It's just pretty barren. People are sad. And then we have here is doing something different, which is what we're doing through agroforestry. We have the community coming together. We're planting not just a single crop, but we're planting a variety of different crops, including the ones that are native to Mozambique, which actually grow well there, believe it or not. And then you see we've got, again, the lion and the lamb coming in on the edges, starting to come into the picture. See here what we have is we have an ecosystem that is being built through agroforestry. And if you look, all of these trees are bearing fruit. We have bananas, and we have this one that's a hardwood tree that we're growing. They're all there. We have the peaceful kingdom coming into the picture. And we have this man here, which all of the guys that work at the farm think this is them, which is really funny. They argue about it all the time. It's great. But he's tending the garden, which is what we created in God's image are called to do, tend the garden. And then here we have in the future, mature food forest here. We have the lion and the lamb together, watching over the community coming together, sharing the food that's grown there. And we have the river of living water restored to an area where you can see there was no living water before. And so it's a really powerful message that we have. And this is plastered on the side of a gazebo right by our road, where thousands of people come back and forth every day into an area that looks just like this. And we can walk them right through this story and share what we are doing and what the Lord is doing through these ministries. So it's a huge, amazing tool that we have. All right. Please, questions. Got a few minutes.
I'm going to make a plug first before the questions. This Tuesday at Trinity Reform from 6 to 8, this art, a bunch of amazing photography that they've taken will be on display. So if you want to see this story in another form, Trinity Reformed from 6 to 8. I'm assuming it's a drop-in, drop-out sort of thing. So you'll see some beautiful photos of some of the folks that they serve. But that's a little plug for that. Okay, now questions.
How do your girls feel when they see our extravagant abundance coming over here and have to go back to such deprivation? Do they not want to go back, or are they kind of sickened by what they see here?
I'd say, I mean, children are so resilient, and they're so resilient. Children are so resilient, and I don't think they would say that they're sickened by what they see here. I mean, they enjoy seeing nice things and going to the park and playing there and going to the library and seeing all the books that they never imagined could have existed. But at the same time, they're itching to go home to that simple life that we have there, where they're excited to go back and to play with our dogs and to play in the yard with their friends and to eat the fresh fruit that's growing all around our house. And it's all these little things that, a lot of people go, oh, it's not, there's no nice schools, there's no nice playgrounds, you can't go and order a pizza, you can't do any of that. But yet, again, it's home. And we have all those really important things that we've made important in our life there that they really do miss.
And I'm sure they're noticing more than they're able to verbalize, obviously. So they don't talk about the disparity really at all. Although our middle daughter, and she's the one who would have the hardest time verbalizing anything or putting thoughts or feelings into words. Recently, we were driving and she did note, and she was talking to me about how no one here really grows their own food. But in Mozambique, we don't have all the stores to go to. So she was noticing that, which I was impressed with. Yeah.
How did you go from Midwestern farming to a completely different technology? How did you lift up your knowledge base?
I went to the school of YouTube a lot. But there are actually a lot of resources that have been recently made available by a couple of organizations working in Brazil and Australia. And the Brazilian ones are actually of really a lot of use to us because they're in Portuguese already,
Right.
which is the trade language in Mozambique. So I can actually take these videos and project them. We have a training center. We can actually project them and we can sit down and watch them and discuss it afterwards and go, think that's going to work? Nope, that's not going to work. We can try it. It's all about experimenting. And I came at this with some ideas that I thought were going to work. And in the short term, some of them did work, but we could realize very quickly that these are not long-term solutions. And we're going to have to think outside of the box here and be willing to experiment. And that is a big thing, because when you don't have the opportunity to experiment, because if you fail, your family's going to starve, that's really hard. And so what we can do is we can actually do these tests, take that risk that people wouldn't normally take, because we can do that. And then we never force anything. We say, look, here's the results. Some stuff, this is a complete fail. And that's all right. That's going to happen. But this has potential. Let's try to refine that a little bit. No, because this worked, maybe that will work. And so we just tend to build our knowledge on that. And it's about learning where we are.
Do you put your experience back onto YouTube?
We are working on that. We do have some of that. Yeah, we've put some stuff out there. And that's a big thing that I'm trying to work on while we're back here. I have tons of video and things that I'm trying to get the resources back out there to pour back into the community of what we're learning, because we're doing it in a much different context. Yeah.
What is the experience of your children with education?
Well, out of necessity, we homeschool. So when our oldest and I lived, when I was on my own, I lived in a town. We did have her in a international school and then a private school. But it got to the point where we realized this isn't very good. Do we think we as non-teachers could actually teach her better than the education she's getting? And unfortunately, we thought, yes, we could do better, but it's not a role that we want to be doing, are good at. So if you know anyone who would like to come to Mozambique and volunteer and homeschool our children for a few months, please talk to us, because yeah, we do homeschool them, but it's a challenge.
You mentioned all the different languages. Are they mostly dialects? How many did you learn? How do the people communicate with one another?
So there are about 39 different languages spoken in Mozambique. But there are about 15 we consider major languages that are probably 500,000 and more speakers. A lot of the other ones they're smaller languages. In our particular area, we're in a convergence zone where we really have about 3 or 4 dialects that all come together in our area. And many of the families will speak more. Most people there will be quadrilingual, really speaking many different languages, including Portuguese, which is the trade language. And so when we're working, we do most everything in Portuguese. And then if it needs to be translated into one dialect or the other, then we'll have someone that can do that. For us to be able to get to the capacity in a dialect to teach what we need to teach could be a long road ahead. So you pick up a few things here and there. And again, I know what the different crops are called in the local dialect, and she knows what the different pains are called in the local dialect. And so you kind of get those things, but we do work through translators.
I would first like to say how refreshing and helpful you have been in terms of giving us a perspective in this difficult week that we were experiencing. How do you get fuel for the car when you're out there in that wild wilderness? How do you get the provisions that you need to do what you're doing so well?
It's planning ahead. And that is something we've really had to learn. Like if you know you're going to be out in an area where you're not going to have fuel, we have jerry cans in the back. We'll fill everything up at the last fuel station we get to. And oftentimes you don't know where the next one is when you're going to get across one. So I always try to err on the side of, too much. And that's part of my nature too. I'm a planner. I like to have all those things. We have dual batteries in the car so that we can actually, sometimes we'll project a Jesus film, or we can load the audio Bibles right there. We'll have a PowerPoint that's not a PowerPoint project. We have like a power socket that's actually built right into the car where we can actually run things off of that. And we have all the camping equipment we need because you never know where you're going to end up. And some people say, yeah, we have a place for you to stay. And then you get there and it's just a few sticks put together. You're like, I'm glad I took my tent because there are a lot of mosquitoes out here. And, you just overplan, you over-prepare and expect that things are not going to go how you plan. Because if you go in there thinking it's going to go exactly how I plan, you are going to be very disappointed. So we live about 30 miles from the nearest city. So we can get that. And there are a lot more fuel stations now than there used to be. It used to be you could go hundreds of miles without seeing a fuel station. And the government has actually gone in and tried to put now, if they have fuel or not, that's another question. Exactly. So again, you've really got to plan ahead. And as soon as you see one, you pull in and you fill up because you're not sure exactly where the next one is going to be. You always try to stay on top of it. And again, having those local people that can tell you, oh yeah, there's fuel here. There's no fuel here. This you have to buy at the market. There's some guy that has diesel behind his place because he's siphoning it out of the trucks over there. It happens. You kind of have to make it work. But
how many languages do the girls speak? And are they in a public school now?
Okay, so how many languages they speak? Our oldest, she is, English, obviously speaks a lot of English. And then Portuguese. Chitewe is the local dialect. She's pretty fluent in Chitewe with her friends. And then she actually learned French in school. Not fluent, but understands a bit of French. She's very good with linguistics. The other girls, mostly Portuguese and English, few words in dialect. No, they are not in public school. It is something we would appreciate your prayers for. Our oldest has just graduated. She actually works at the Holland Language Academy. She has a job as an instructional assistant in the preschool and absolutely loves it. So that was a huge answer to prayer because we had no idea what to even pray for her future. But she loves working with kids and and will stay here when we go back. So, yes, please take care of her if you see her around. Our youngest two, we are still waiting for their citizenship to come through. We've applied for their citizenship and we were expecting that would come through back in September and we haven't heard anything yet. So they're here on tourist visas, which means that we can't actually enroll them in school without transferring that to an education visa, or it actually makes them illegal here illegally, which would get in the way of fulfilling there. So honestly, their tourist visas expire on the 30th of December, which is not great. We applied this week for an extension so that they should at least be able to stay here until April, but we don't know if they're going to grant us that or not. So we'd appreciate your prayers because we would like to rather not leave between the holidays this year and try to get back to Mozambique. We were planning on staying here longer. We thought it would all be done.
I have a agroforestry question.
Yes.
I'm just going to tee you up for some things.
Okay. What do you got?
I'd like you to talk to us about why pineapple is better on an agroforest, the benefits to the families of planting hardwoods that won't be harvested for decades, and a little bit more about the river that might exist.
Yes.
So do you have those three?
Yeah. Quickly, I'll do it quick. Okay, so pineapple, if you've ever been to Hawaii or seen where pineapples are planted, what do you see? You see a huge, vast field of pineapples out in the sun. They are actually native to the rainforest of the Amazon. They are supposed to be an understory crop. They actually grow better in the shade. And so what we see is we actually plant a pineapple between every tree. We plant our trees about 24 inches apart, 18 to 24 inches apart, and a pineapple in between every one. And they love it. And the pineapples come off non-acidic. So you don't have that where you only, you eat two pieces and you're starting to feel it on your lips and your stomach. You can eat a whole pineapple, core and everything. They're like candy. And we don't get, typically with pineapples, there's two seasons. You get the main season, and then you get a second season that'll have about 25% production. We see them all year long. They just give in their native environment. Second question was, we use a lot of native hardwoods. We call this an investment. Not only do they really help overall in our ecosystems because they're creating a bit of shade for some of the other crops to grow underneath. Amazingly, the hardwoods in our area grow very quickly. We have mahogany trees that will grow 10 feet a year. So they grow really fast. They create an ecosystem again for the birds and everything in there. And we're investing in the future. We actually grow the most expensive wood in the world on the farms called African blackwood. I didn't know that. I was cutting it down and giving it to our goats because they love it. So I've learned that now that we should keep those. It takes about 80 years to mature, but a mature tree you can sell for $10,000. So for a family that is taking in $1,200 a year at minimum wage, that's a huge investment. And so it's one thing that we really talk about a lot with people like, look, if your grandparents had planted 10 of these trees for you, you would be singing the praises of your grandparents. Now, what are you going to do for your grandchildren? What are they going to say about you? Are they going to say they're the ones that destroyed our land by cutting down all the trees and not giving us anything? Or are you going to invest in the future? And so it's a big thing we're talking about investment. War culture tends to breed that idea of let's eat today because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So we're trying to get people to think beyond that. I completely forgot the third.
The river.
Yes. So another really interesting thing is that these hardwood trees put down really, really deep roots. And those tap roots actually tap into the water resources way down in the soil. And photosynthesis makes this pump that the water keeps coming from low, coming up to the trees. Now, this pump doesn't turn off at night when photosynthesis stops. So where does that water go once it gets up through those roots? At night, the trees actually push the water out in their lateral roots. They actually water the crops around them from that taproot. And that's why we're saying that these rivers are going to come back, because people who have practiced this agroforestry in areas that have become arid, where the rivers have gone dry, have seen rivers come back to life just because of implementing agroforestry.
And that is why I am now an agroforest evangelist. I mean, it's incredible, right? Hey, let's give our thanks to Chad and Dara. And a reminder that you can go to Trinity Reformed on Tuesday from 6 to 8. Also, if you ever come on Wednesdays, they've been joining our church on Wednesday nights. And their daughter, Xenia, who's a middle school age, has become friends with some of our kids. She's been doing middle school. She's in Sunday school right now. And it's pretty awesome that Nettie is just loving Holland Language Academy. And so they're becoming part of they're our people. All right. So thank you. Oh, and there's prayer cards and there's other things up here that you can get. Thanks.